the MMA fortune teller.
The teller. The teller. The teller. The teller. The teller.
The teller checking in for UFC Sao Paulo. We're going to be breaking down the entire card here. We got Jacre Souza moving up to light heavyweight to take on an established light heavyweight fighter in John Blachowicz. We'll be getting to that fight here in a little bit. Looking forward to breaking down that fight. The co-main event, in my opinion, has all the makings to be a very entertaining fight. Anytime Shogun steps in there, you guys already know what it is. It's going to be a crazy fight. Paul Craig, you might not like him. Maybe you do like him, but one thing I would hope that we can all agree on, when the guy steps in there, it's usually an entertaining fight because the guy's either getting knocked out, put on his ass, or he's slapping on a last-second triangle or some type of Hail Mary submission. The guy brings it every time he steps in there, man. You got to like the energy he brings. He walks over to his opponent, gets in his face before the fight starts. I like Paul Craig, and I think this is a very intriguing matchup here at 205, if you ask me. I mean, I won't go too much into it now. I'm not saying this fight has any title implications or anything like that, but I think, nevertheless, it's going to be an entertaining fight. And then throughout the entire card, man, we got some solid Brazilian fighters, and fighters from all around the world as well. They always mix them in here and there. So we'll be getting to that. Let's take a look back at UFC Russia that took place last weekend. Zabit. How about Zabit, man? A lot of you guys called it. His cardio would have an impact into the fight, man. In the third round, I did not like the way that he looked. He dominated, I wouldn't necessarily say dominated, actually, but he won round one and round two pretty easily. Although, Calvin did land some solid punches here and there. But, the third round, man, Calvin really looked good in that fight. If that's a 5-round fight right now, I'm telling you guys, I don't care if they run that fight back and Zabit has as much time to train for it as he wants. I think that Calvin has to be the favorite going into that fight. That guy's a beat. I don't know, man. I was high on him early, but he definitely has some issues with his cardio the later those fights start to go. So, other than that, Alexander Volkov made easy work of Greg Hardy. He showed that he's just on another level. As far as betting goes, I did have a big play on Rustam Khabilov. Khabilov came through. I know it wasn't the most entertaining fight, but, he got the job done. He used his wrestling, and that's exactly what I was hoping he would do to pull the fight off. So, that was good to see. I did warn you guys here. You can run the tape back. David Zawada, I said that guy was live and the line was off. That guy's a good fighter. Run the tape back. You can listen to exactly what I said. Close fight. The Roosevelt Roberts was a close fight against Yokolov. Davy Grant against Grigory Popov. I thought Popov won the second and third round pretty easily. That was pretty disappointing to see that they gave that fight split decision to Davy Grant. But nevertheless, we move forward and we got UFC Sao Paulo. And let's start breaking down these fights. So taking a look at the first fight of the UFC Sao Paulo card, we got Tracy Cortez taking on Vanessa Melo. Vanessa Melo, we saw fight not too long ago against the very tough Mexican chick in Irene Aldana. Irene really put a beating on Vanessa. That was a tough fight for Vanessa Melo, man. She went out there to Mexico, taking on, in my opinion, one of the toughest female fighters on planet Earth, really. Aldana is a savage. And, Aldana really, like I said, she put a beating on her. It wasn't the best look for Vanessa Melo, making her UFC debut. But Vanessa definitely showed that she's a tough chick. She's not going to be put away easily. But in regards to her skills, her striking, definitely not that good. Her striking is it's one of those typical, I hate to say it like that, but one of those typical just below average female fighter type of striking, you know what I mean? It's just, it's not that strong. It's not that precise. It's kind of tough to watch. Tracy Cortez, on the other hand, she made her debut on Dana White's Contender Series not too long ago. For those of you guys that remember that episode, she looked pretty good. She stepped in there. She got the job done, got the unanimous decision. She's only 25 years old. This is a girl that, I've said time and time again, but you got these young girls, young guys too, but around this age, they really start to blossom. This will be her first time on the big stage, but, everything I've seen on tape, she's the better fighter. And I expect that to translate into this fight where I think she'll get the W. But again, this is lower level women's MMA. This is, you got to be very careful when you're betting lower level women's MMA, because really anything can happen in there. But from what I've seen on tape, Cortez should get the job done. If the fight plays out close, if it plays out closely like a lot of these women's mixed martial arts fights do, the fight's taking place in Brazil. Melo should have the crowd going behind her, cheering her on and whatnot. So be very careful if you're looking to play this fight. In my opinion, it's a pass. In the next bout, we'll be sticking with another female fight here, but it's taking place in the flyweight division. We got Veronica Macedo taking on Ariane Lipski. I personally love to watch Veronica Macedo fight. Anytime she's fighting, I'm definitely tuned in. This girl, she's, she could throw down as well. She even though she lost 3 bouts in a row before her last win against Polyana Viana, she definitely showed in her last fight that she does have skills to pay the bills. Her jiu-jitsu is pretty solid. She's an aggressive, tough competitor. You look at the girls that defeated her, even though, she lost those 3 fights that I talked about against Jillian Robertson, Andrea Lee, even Ashley Evans Smith. That was a girl that was just way bigger than her, kind of bullied her in there a little bit. But, don't look too much into those fights because, like I said, you saw her in her last fight. When she fights opponents that are on her level or below her level, she rises to the occasion. Had a beautiful armbar victory against Polyana Viana. Ariane Lipski, this is a girl that's coming off 2 losses. So this is a big fight for her as well. Ariane Lipski, that's another girl, you want to tune in when she fights. They call her the Violence Queen. And, she's coming off 2 losses, but she lost to Molly McCann and Joanne Calderwood. Those are both, solid women's fighters, in the division. Whether you want to believe it or not, I mean, that is the case. Those are above average fighters in the division. Before she lost those 2 bouts, she was on quite a hell of a win streak, almost about 10 wins in a row, and she had a lot of finishes as well. Her striking, it's above average. I like her striking for the division. It's a tough fight. I tend to think that Macedo is going to win this fight just because she kind of has that aggressive type of style, man. She's strong. She's like one of those scrappy, aggressive type of females. And I think that she has the better ground game here. She's tough on the feet as well. I might slightly give the edge to Lipski on the feet, but I think that Macedo, having the better ground game, gives her a better chance to win this fight. I think that she can get this fight to the ground at one point in time, maybe even pulls off the submission and ends it. Or maybe she's able to get some control time on top. We'll see how it plays out. Again, though, this is, I guess you could technically say this is lower level women's mixed martial arts, in the UFC as well. So you got to be very careful if you're looking to bet on one of these fighters. Be very careful. It's probably going to be a dog or pass type of situation, when you have odds like we have here in this fight. So be careful, guys. The former UFC bantamweight champion and Renan Barão taking on Douglas Andrade, a tough fighter, man, with a really solid resume. This guy, Douglas Da Silva Andrade, he's 25-3. He's been around the block. The guy carries power in his hands, man. He'll put you out. Kind of reminds me in a roundabout way of John Lineker. He's not the biggest, most imposing looking fighter, but definitely carries power, can put you out. He's well-rounded, just a hard-nosed type of Brazilian fighter. And then you got a guy in Renan Barão, which we've talked about in the past. You guys really know the deal with this guy. This is a guy that at one point in time was ruling the bantamweight division. Definitely seemed to be one of the best pound-for-pound fighters of all time, up until the point that TJ Dillashaw came in and just really derailed that whole train. In fact, it probably wasn't even TJ Dillashaw that derailed it. It probably was USADA and drug testing. I mean, to be honest, the guy definitely had to be on some type of performance-enhancing drugs because his career completely flipped on its back. And don't get me wrong, TJ Dillashaw definitely had an impact on that as well because the amount of brain damage that Renan Barão took in those 2 fights, in my opinion, is probably, if you take a window of 2 fights of a fighter's career, those 2 fights back-to-back, that TJ Dillashaw, actually there was a fight in between that, but if you take those 2 fights, it was within a 3-fight window. The amount of damage that he took, I don't think you could point to me 2 fights where a fighter took as much damage because he didn't just go flat out. He didn't get knocked out. TJ Dillashaw was just putting a clinic on him. battering him. He was just out on his feet, just getting his brain scrambled up like just some Saturday morning scrambled eggs. It was bad. Since then, he loses to Jeremy Stevens, Aljamain Sterling, Brian Kelleher, Andre Ewell. And he just gets knocked out in his last fight against Luke Sanders. So, you guys see where I'm going with this. I'm definitely taking Douglas Andrade to win this fight. As I talked about earlier, Douglas carries power in his hands. He has good takedown defense. He'll keep this fight on the feet. They're gonna have to engage in some exchanges, and I could just see Renan Barão getting knocked out once again. And after he loses that, he'll have lost 5 in a row. He'll have lost 8 of his last 9 fights. At that point in time, you got to hang the gloves up. You got to call it a day because, Renan Barão, the one thing I will say, they're not really giving him just some easy type of fights. They definitely throw him in there with, above average type fighters, but that's to be expected because, Renan Barão, like I said earlier, this guy was ruling the division. They're not going to just all of a sudden give you, these below average type of fighters for the sheer fact that they know that you were on steroids and that your career is just a mess at this point. So, going into all that, like I said, man, Douglas Da Silva Andrade, he's the pick. And I would be a little surprised if he doesn't get the victory by finish as well. So let's see how it plays out. In the welterweight division, we got a solid fight right here. Warlley Alves taking on Randy Brown. These are 2 very skilled opponents, especially in regards to Warlley Alves. This is a guy, when he's on, when it's his night and he's in there and he's on point, this is a guy that could, in my opinion, this guy could beat anybody. He's taken out Colby Covington. Yeah, Colby was a little bit green at the time and he wasn't as polished up, but, Warlley Alves went in there, got the submission, guillotined Colby there. But that does happen to some wrestlers earlier in their careers. That's a move that they get caught with very often, the guillotine choke, diving in for takedowns and whatnot. But, if you look at the guys to defeat Warlley, Kamaru Usman, James Krause, Brian Barberena, 3 solid fighters. If there is a chink in his armor, it's definitely his cardio. I've seen him kind of fade in the later rounds of fights. Even sometimes early in fights, he's blown his gas tank pretty early in a few fights I've seen too. But when it's all said and done, this guy is a solid striker. He can go in there, he can knock you out. He throws fucking bombs. You watch him in the fight against Sergio Moraes, connected with a nasty uppercut, finished him. And a lot of his fights, man, you see him when he's throwing, he's not throwing to score points. This guy's throwing to take your head off. He's a solid opponent. And then, you take a look at Randy Brown. Randy Brown is an athletic fighter. He's quick in there. A very quick striker with pretty good hands. He had I got to bring this up for a second, but he had a nasty, he took a nasty defeat against Nico Price with that off his back hammer fist that Nico Price hit Randy Brown with. So, I don't know if that necessarily means that Randy Brown has chin issues, but you don't see a lot of guys getting knocked out on top of their opponent in their guard. So that was something a little different. But, if you take a look at his resume, this isn't a guy that's really been finished. Basically, he's never been knocked out other than that fight. So I don't want to necessarily say that he has chin issues. I'm going to lean Warlley Alves. I think that Warlley Alves, as I stated, the guy just carries a lot of power. He's a skilled striker. He has good jiu-jitsu. The line's close here, too. So this is a fight that, you could definitely look to take. But, Randy Brown is a skilled opponent. But I'm taking Warlley Alves all day here. Transitioning to the next fight, we got Bobby King Green taking on Francisco Trinaldo. This guy Trinaldo is something else. He's one of those specimens. This guy's past the 41-year-old mark, creeping up on that 42-year-old mark. It's nuts. He's still stepping in the octagon and fighting at a very high level. You take a look into his last fight, he won that fight, hands down. I don't care what you say. If anyone wants to run the tape back, that was one of the worst robberies I've seen. It's not even up for debate. He did beat Alexander Hernandez in that fight. Alexander Hernandez is a guy, a lot of people were hyping up. That train has slowly been derailed. He's not going to be what a lot of people thought he was going to be. If he's lucky, he'll get his career back to a stable position where he can maintain in the UFC. But, Trinaldo, this is a guy, he finishes Evan Dunham before that, takes out Jim Miller, a crafty veteran, beats a guy like Paul Felder earlier in his career. I mean, he's a solid fighter. He's been locked in there with a lot of top fighters or solid UFC fighters and is, pulled up but the W, got victories. So taking out Ross Pearson back in the day, Chad Lepre, Norman Park, Leandro Silva. You take a look at his losses. I mean, James Vick and Kevin Lee, those are the two as of recently. And you go way back down the line, Michael Chiesa. Those are all, very skilled fighters. The one thing I did not like in the last fight against Alexander Hernandez is that, he was just kind of chasing Hernandez around the cage. And I felt like he should have cut him off a little bit and just scored a few more points to solidify that victory. But that maybe the fighter IQ is the one thing you got to watch out for. But Bobby Green, on the other hand, let's talk about Bobby Green. Bobby Green, this is a guy that has underrated wrestling, quick hands, he has good boxing, and this is a guy that, he gets the job done quite often too. He's coming off, some tough losses as of recently. He only has won one of his last 5 fights here. But, the Jacare close, that was, a lackluster type performance. The Rashid Magomedov fight, he lost that. It was a split decision. Rashid is a solid fighter fighting over there in, not the World Series of Fighting. What do they call it now? Professional Fight League. Then he lost to Dustin Poirier and Edson Barbosa. I don't need to say nothing about those guys. Those are top of the line type of fighters. So my point being is that Bobby Green, this guy, he's a skilled fighter. He really is. When he steps in there, don't get it twisted. You saw what he did to Eric Koch. Really just outclassed Eric Koch and put a clinic on him. I'm going to take Bobby Green here. I think that Father Time is going to start to catch up to Trinaldo. And like I said, the fighter IQ is sometimes not the best, and his volume is a little low. I think Bobby Green puts a little bit of a higher pace here, uses his boxing, has good wrestling as well. Like I said, underrated wrestling. Not a lot of people realize that about Bobby Green. And, I'll take Bobby Green to pull this fight off right here. Fighting out of Uruguay, we got Eduardo Garagorri taking on the Brazilian Ricardo Ramos. You guys know about Ricardo Ramos. This guy's a nasty striker. He has the patented spinning back elbow, a move that he's put guys out with before. He's connected on multiple different opponents. He's a nasty striker. I like Ramos up here at the featherweight division better than the bantamweight division. He was very sucked out in the bantamweight division. A very muscular opponent, but you've seen him in some fights. It seemed that his cardio kind of let him down as well. He seems to be very drained, so I do like him in this division. And like I said, he's a very nasty striker, pretty good takedown defense. The jiu-jitsu's, it's okay, it's there, but, he's not a jiu-jitsu fighter. This guy's here to strike with you. He's here to put you out. That's the type of fighter we're dealing with. And then you look at Eduardo Garagorri. This is a guy, 13-0, a nice little resume here, but he really hasn't fought the upper echelon, in the featherweight division, period. I mean, this guy really hasn't fought top-level competition. This is a guy, and also, in my opinion, that lost his last fight. I do believe that was one of the biggest robberies we've seen in a while. I hate to keep harping on the judges. I know I did it earlier, and I do it here and there, but quite honestly, I mean, it's disgusting sometimes. And this was another fight, his last fight. It was a fight that took place in Uruguay. He clearly lost the bout against Humberto Bandené, the Peruvian fighter, who's a young, electrifying South American prospect as well. And they gave the fight to Eduardo. So just throwing that out there. But Eduardo is, he's a skilled opponent. Don't get it twisted. I'm not taking anything away from him. He's a skilled striker. He's pretty well-rounded, but this is a guy also. He likes to trade on the feet. He likes to use his speed and to try to win these fights. And, he's put a lot of guys out. He's had some finishes with his hands. He's had a couple submissions. He's had 2 submissions as well. So, like I said, his jiu-jitsu is there. But I think this fight's going to take place in the feet. And being that the fight's in Brazil, we talked a little bit about that home cooking earlier. But, throwing that, a little seasoning on the steak to make it taste a little bit better. Besides that, though, Ricardo Ramos, he should win this fight hands down. Regardless of the judges or whatnot. I like Ramos. I think he's the better striker here. And I think it would be really nice if he could pull off that spinning back elbow once again and put Eduardo out. I think that would really get the crowd going nuts over there. Brazil and Uruguay, this is I've talked about this in the past too. These are two of the biggest countries in regards to soccer or football. So you got that type of soccer rivalry right here. Uruguay is a very good team as well. So I like how the UFC sprinkles these kinds of matchups through these Brazilian cards. So yeah, man, Ricardo Ramos is the pick for sure. The line, it's a little high. Right now it's in the mid -200s, but I think Ramos gets it done. But you got to be careful. Eduardo is a dangerous fighter as well. We touched a little bit upon him earlier. We got James Krause fighting over there in Brazil. He's taking on Sérgio Moraes. Let's break down his fight here now. James Krause, this is a guy, one of the very, very few that you've seen do something like this. An active UFC fighter that is one of the best head coaches in the game. He has a lot of young guys and young girls, fighting under his tutelage right now. And I think that's an amazing thing to see in the game. You don't see it that much, and I'm a fan of this guy, James Krause. I think he's one of the more intellectual fighters that you'll see enter the octagon. This is a guy that's working the ins and outs, all different aspects of his game. Not that other fighters aren't, but if you catch my drift, you can kind of see there's different levels to some of these fighters. You could just see, man. You go on YouTube and you look up James Krause, see some videos of him, the way that he teaches, the way that he works different aspects of the game. This guy is really, really, he's not leaving any rock unturned in the MMA game. So shout out to James Krause. I wouldn't be surprised if this guy has a champion fighter under his belt one day. Being a coach of a champion fighter, I could easily see that. So keep an eye out for that. As far as him being a champion, it's not a knock on him. I don't necessarily see him ever being the welterweight champion of the world. I could see him working his way, up to a top 10 fight eventually, possibly. This would be a really big win for him right here. Sérgio Moraes, I talked about him too. Sérgio Moraes, this guy, his jiu-jitsu is about as good as it gets in the UFC. It's up there. This guy is a very, very skilled Brazilian jiu-jitsu opponent. As far as his overall MMA game, though, I'm not that big of a fan of it, especially as of recently. His technique with the striking, man, this guy's constantly going for these windmill type of punches, trying to get the knockout, but they're very telegraphed, and his opponents, they see them coming a mile away. They dip and dodge. Moraes' cardio is not the best, and it's shown as of recently. He's only won 2 of his last 5 fights, where I think that there's a couple different fights that he could have easily have won if he would have had a little bit better of a game plan, or have had a little bit of better fighter IQ. Now he's going to get locked in there against a guy in James Krause who has just as good a fighter IQ as you can ask for a fighter that you got your money behind. So, you take a look at James Krause here. They have some similar opponents in Warlley, Alves. Moraes just lost to Alves, and James Krause did his thing against Warlley, Alves. We talked about that earlier. James Krause is on a 3-fight win streak, taking out guys like Alex White, Tom Galicchio, Warlley, Alves. He did beat Ramsey Nijam not too long ago too. But he's just on a roll right now. He's hot, and I think this is a good matchup for him. He does have to watch out, for the haymakers of Moraes, because Moraes definitely, he carries some power on his hands, I'm telling you. As long as he does that, avoids danger, he could work his stand-up game, out-volume Moraes. I would like for him to keep this fight on the feet. I don't think he needs to flirt around with Moraes' jiu-jitsu, but, God forbid for Krause, if it somehow hits the mat, Krause is more than capable on the mat too. I think he can avoid the situation. He could avoid the submission, excuse me. And I think this is his fight to win. I really do think this is his fight to win. As far as the line goes, he's about a 2-1 favorite. So that's kind of where I would expect it to be. There might be some value on that. See where you can get that line at, and let's see what we got there Saturday. We got a nice matchup here. Some very skilled Brazilian opponents that are trying to make names for themselves in the game. We got Wellington Turman taking on Markus Perez. Markus Perez is going to be a significantly older fighter here. 29 years old. He's creeping up on 30, and he's fighting the young buck. Wellington's only 23 years old. So, this guy Wellington, he looked pretty good in his last match against Carl Robertson. And if you just saw what Carl Robertson did this past weekend, that definitely makes that split decision loss look that much better. At the age of only 23, stepping into the UFC, his first fight, taking on a guy like Carl Robertson, a very skilled opponent. The fight was very close. I like what I've seen from Wellington. But he's going to have another very tough fight here. Markus Perez is no joke. I like what I've seen from Markus Perez. Carries a lot of power in his hands. I like his takedown defense. I like his scrambling ability. His jiu-jitsu is up to par. The guy has good jiu-jitsu. Pulling off a nasty anaconda choke in his last fight against Anthony Hernandez. Anthony Hernandez is a fighter I like. So, if you look at his 2 losses, they were against Andrew Sanchez and Eric Anders. Two hard-nosed middleweight fighters. That's really what they are. 2 guys that they prevail in the octagon quite often. So, no real shame in those 2 losses. I think he's grown from it. This is a guy that also has a victory against Ian Heinisch. It's a fighter that's a very skilled fighter. He's taking out Paulo Thiago, an ex-UFC fighter from back in the day, for those of you guys that remember him. Eric Perez has been around the block, so, this is a close fight. But I like Perez here. I like Perez. I've been watching him for quite a while. He's been on my radar. And I think Wellington, Turman, he's still young. I think he needs to be a little bit more seasoned up. I think Markus Perez, I think the age is going to help him here. I'm going to take Perez to win this fight. So here we go with another very similar matchup as to the last fight I just broke down. We got 2 young and hungry Brazilian prospects. I guess I don't necessarily want to say young. Some of these guys are creeping up on their 30s, but what I'm trying to get at is, all 4 of these fighters from the last fight and this fight, these are very skilled Brazilian opponents that really haven't made, a big leap yet. They haven't made that big splash. Their name hasn't been on the scene yet. And not all 4 of these guys, I think they all have the ability to do that. But out of all 4 of them, I think Antonio Arroyo is most likely to do that out of all 4. This guy is a nasty fighter. For those of you guys that remember his last fight on the Dana White's Contender Series, he looked amazing to me. He really came through in a big way for me. I made some money on that. That was against Steven Regman, who Steven Regman was, he was a very dangerous fighter in his own right, very dangerous striker. And he put up a good match for a little bit, but Arroyo just, if you watch the way he fought that fight, the amount of volume he put out there, the technique of his striking, how well-rounded he was when it touched the mat, this guy's dangerous. I really believe this guy's the real deal. And, he had 2 setbacks earlier in his career, as far back as 2017, a couple years back. But I think this guy has really turned the page as far as his career goes. I think it's time to really take it to the next level. This is going to be a big test for him, though. This guy, Andre Muniz, this guy's a solid fighter as well. So, if he can get a nice knockout victory here against Andre, I think we could see some big matchups with Antonio to come, some big names. And if you ask me right now, you throw Antonio Arroyo with some of the bigger name middleweight fighters, even though you guys don't know Antonio as much, he's going to take those guys out. I'm telling you, you think of those guys I'm talking about, like those guys that have a name, the Derek Brunsons, I would say Elias Theodoro. He's not even in the game anymore over here in the UFC. He finally got cut, but those types of fighters, the Brad Tavares, the guy he just got knocked out himself. But Antonio Arroyo, this guy, he's going to take out those big names. He's going to make a name for himself. So we'll see who they match him up with. But of course, he does have to get past Andre first, and this guy Andre is no joke as well. He's a dangerous fighter. He's been around the block. He really has. He's had a lot of fights. 18-4, over 20 professional fights, and this guy is very well-rounded as well. Very solid jiu-jitsu, and he's a nasty striker. So, really looking forward to seeing how this fight takes place. I'm taking Arroyo though. He's came through for me in the past, and I think, like I said, this guy's a lot of potential. So, let's see how it plays out. Some people like to call this guy right here the submission king. In my opinion, he's right up there with some of the greatest submission artists we've seen in the octagon. So I have no problem with anybody that wants to call him that. And no, I'm not talking about Jared Gordon, although, I'm a fan of Jared Gordon's, man. Really cool guy. I met him before. But I'm talking about Charles Du Bronx Oliveira. Man, this guy, some of you guys forget how long Charles has been in the UFC. He entered the UFC at a very young age. We're talking about back in 2010. At the time, let's see. Charles right now, he's 38. He came in the game around 20 years old, this guy. And right from the get-go, I mean, just subbing guys left and right. That's why he has, I believe, I'm not sure if he has the record for the most submission wins in the UFC. I know he's right up there. I believe he does have the record as far as his division goes. But, this guy has just submitted guy after guy. And like I said, as soon as he entered the game, sub Darren Elkins with the armbar, rear naked choked Efrain Escudero. I remember that fight against Efrain. That was a fight that, back then, Efrain Escudero, he won the Ultimate Fighter, one of the seasons he was on. He kind of had a big name for himself, and Du Bronx just came in there and just snatched up that hype with that victory. And ever since then, it's just really just been, winning fights in the UFC. Of course, he's lost some. He's battled so many times, but look at the guys that he's lost to. You're talking about, that I got to bring up the Jim Miller loss because, I'm a big fan of Jim Miller's, and Jim Miller pulled off a beautiful knee bar. But that was a fight where Jim Miller was in his prime and Charles was just a young buck. So no real shame in that. That was a learning experience for Charles. After that fight, he's stepped back into the octagon and just continuously submitted guys. Like I said, though, you look at the guys that he lost to: Donald Cerrone, Cub Swanson back in the day, Frankie Edgar, Max Holloway, Anthony Pettis, Ricardo Lamas, Paul Felder. And then as of recently, he's on a nice 5-fight win streak, taking out Clay Guida, Christos Giagos, got the rematch against Jim Miller where he absolutely destroyed him, pulled off the rear naked choke, just took out David Tamer, Nick Lentz, winning the third fight that they competed in against. I'm running my mouth right now, but I'm a big fan of this guy, Charles Oliveira, because he's made me money, too, throughout the years. This guy's continuously came through as a favorite. And then you look at a fight right here. He's a minus 335. Usually I would say, that's pretty steep, against a tough competitor in Jared Gordon. But in Brazil, got to go with Charles Oliveira to win this fight. I think it's a bad matchup for Jared Gordon as well. Jared Gordon, he tries to use that bully type style. He'll try to throw his hands, go in for takedowns, try to hold you down. He's going to engage in the grappling with Charles, and I think that Charles has a great chance of pulling off a submission here. Jared Gordon, I like the guy, man. I like what he stands for. You'll never hear me say a bad word about the guy. But I think that Charles is just a little bit on another level here. Jared Gordon, he's had some tough bouts as of recently too. You look at the Dan Moret fight. That was a fight that was a very close fight. And Dan Moret, you throw him in the cage with Charles Oliveira, he's getting finished. And before that fight, he lost to Joaquim Silva and Diego Ferreira. Both those fights, he got finished. So the chin has been a little bit questionable as of recently too. He's taken some damage. The Diego Ferreira fight in particular was nasty. And Diego used his jiu-jitsu to set up that finish with his hand. So, yeah, Charles Oliveira all day. I hope the fight plays out somewhat close, or I hope Jared Gordon puts on a decent showing, because I'm a fan of that guy, and I think he's a great fighter, and I like everything he stands for, and I would like to see him, get more fights in the octagon, hopefully just against guys that are a little bit on a lower level than Du Bronx. So, yeah, Du Bronx to win that fight. We reached the co-main event of the evening. Touched upon in this fight a little bit earlier. I'm very much looking forward to this fight. We got Paul Craig taking on Maurício Shogun Rua, however you want to say that last name, Brazilian style or English style, or American style. Shogun, this guy, anytime that he steps in there, it's going to be an entertaining fight. Most likely you're going to see a finish. Unfortunately, nowadays, a lot of the times, it's Shogun. That's the guy getting finished in there. This, in my opinion, the line is off on this fight. I'll tell you guys right now, I think the line is off. Paul Craig, this guy, he's a brute, this guy, man. I understand he's not the most skilled of fighters. His striking's not the best. This is a guy that's going to continuously come forward. He does have nasty elbows, so he can put you out with his elbows, man. He's rangy, has a good reach. He's going to be a lot bigger in there, man. He's going to have a 3-inch reach. He's going to be a little bit more filled out. Shogun's been around the block, and I like the fact that he's had some time off, but I don't necessarily think that's going to be I don't think it's going to be enough, the fact that he had that time off, to repair his chin. I think this guy has just taken so much damage throughout the years, just ridiculous amounts of damage, that if he's connected on, he could be put out. This was a guy, he was doing his thing years ago, but I don't know, man. Shogun, I mean, if you look at the guys that he's defeated as of recently, I mean, he took out Tyson Pedro. That was a big win for him. That was actually a big win for him. I was a little surprised he pulled that off. Anthony Smith just took him clean out in that fight. Then he took out Gene Vellante. You know, Gene Vellante, man, that guy is a very below average fighter. I'm telling you guys. And then just, I mean, you look at the guys that's finished him as of recently. I mean, remember Chael Sonnen guillotine choked him. Dan Henderson finished him in that rematch. You know, OSP, that was a nasty knockout that OSP did to him. And they were going to run that back too. Luckily for Shogun, they didn't. I mean, he did have the split decision victory against Corey Anderson, but I don't know, man. I mean, this fight, Shogun's going to want to keep this fight on the feet. He's going to try to exchange with Paul Craig. And he's going to try to work his hands and whatnot. But I don't know why, man. I have this gut feeling that Paul Craig is just going to be able to eat the shots and exchange back. And I just can see Shogun getting clipped and being put out. I mean, if the fight plays out closely, of course, you know that Shogun's going to get the nod, you know, being that the fight's taking place in Brazil. So as far as betting goes, I mean, that's definitely a big influence on the line. But I'm just going to tell you guys straight up, my gut feeling is Paul Craig's going to win this fight, and I'm going to pick Paul Craig to win this fight. I know some of you guys aren't going to like it. The fight can easily go either way, like I said. If Shogun survives and it's a close fight back and forth, the judges are definitely going to lean towards him. And of course, Shogun has potential to put anybody out. I mean, he puts a lot of fucking power into his punches. He throws his hips into them. I mean, he puts a lot into his punches. If he connects, he could put Bearju out. I mean, we've seen Bearju get knocked out also. Alonzo Menafield put him out in a nasty way too. So, of course, anything can happen in this fight, but as far as value goes, the value's on Paul Craig. So don't be surprised when the Bearju pulls this fight off. I do think he has the ability to finish it on the feet if he connects, maybe in the clinch or whatnot, if he wobbles Shogun. But at the same time, don't be surprised if Bearju gets on top as well. He has a very, very underrated, I don't even want to say underrated. I guess a lot of you guys know about his jiu-jitsu game. He has a solid jiu-jitsu game, and he's a very big guy, and he'll keep pressing. So don't be surprised if Paul Craig gets on top of Shogun and wins those grappling exchanges as well, and maybe gets on top, and he could even work some ground and pound, where I could see him getting a finish with the ground and pound as well on Shogun. So yeah, I'm excited for that co-main event spot. Let's see how that fight plays out. Now we reached the main event of the evening. We got Jon Blachowicz taking on Jacare Souza. This is a big fight, no matter how you spin it. If Jacare pulls this off, he wins his light heavyweight debut, and I expect him to get a big, big name after this. And if Jon Blachowicz wins, he's stringing that together with a big win over Luke Rockhold. There'll be back-to-back victories over middleweight fighters moving up to his division, but big name middleweight fighters. So it's a good look for him. He was coming off a loss before the Luke fight against Thiago Santos, but Santos was on the tear. He was taking everybody out. You even saw what he did against John Jones, so no real shame in that. Before that, he was taking guys out. Nikita Krylov, I'm high on him. Jimmy Manoa, Jared Cannonier, Devin Clark. He's really been stringing victories together here. So, if he goes out here and he takes Souza out with the finish too, 5-round fight, he has power in his hands. If he gets the finish, like I could possibly see happening, or even pulls off the decision, it's going to be a good look for him. He's going to get a big, big name fight in his next fight. So, he'll be creeping his way towards a title fight. The way that I see this fight playing out, I see Blachowicz being able to keep this fight on the feet. I think he can stuff the takedowns. Even if somehow the fight hits the mat, I think he can get back to his feet. He has pretty good takedown defense. He'll be the more naturally bigger fighter in there. I give the edge, as far as the striking goes, to Blachowicz as well. So Jacare does carry power, though. He can knock anybody out if he connects. I know he's only going to have more power up at this weight division, so he could put anybody out. But, you take a look at Souza as of recently, he's, even some of the fights that he's won, the Chris Weidman fight, he was losing that fight until he got the knockout, and Weidman's getting knocked out by everybody. So, it wasn't that big of a stamp on his career. It was a nice victory, but, he wasn't looking that good in that fight. Jacare Souza, he flaked in the Kelvin Gastelum fight. Really didn't look that good in that fight. Towards the end of it, kind of gassed out. And then, of course, the Jacre Manson fight. I was there. I was live for that fight. was there live. And, Hermanson just outclassed him in that fight. So it wasn't a good look for him. And, he's just been, going back and forth, win, loss. And, the one guy who he definitely has his number is Derek Brunson. He has the 2 victories against Derek Brunson. But I don't know. I think John Błachowicz is a different type of fighter. We're talking about a real, natural, light heavyweight fighter that is just reaching his prime right about now. And I'm going to take John Błachowicz to win this fight over in Brazil. And I could even see him getting the finish. He carries a lot of power. He throws a nasty body kick. Watch out for Blachowicz' nice left body kick. Actually, both body kicks. He whips them around nicely. And, we'll see how the fight takes place. As always, I hope all you guys enjoy the fights. The teller's going to hit the gym up right now. It's, a late Wednesday night over here. I've been busy, man, running errands all day, getting things done. As promised, I'm telling you, don't sleep on the teller. I got a lot of big things to come. I got some fighter interviews to come. I've already been in the talks with a couple UFC fighters. And I'm working on some things for the channel. I know things have been just going a little steady right here now, just doing fight picks and whatnot. But as far as the channel goes, I got some big things, on my mind that I'm looking forward to doing. And you guys stay tuned and you're going to see all of that. But, as of right now, it's just a daily grind, getting things done, getting the fight picks out there. And we're going to capitalize and we're going to make some money this weekend. And, that's what it's all about, guys. So you guys enjoy the fights. On that note, I'm going to sign out. The teller signing out.